Hello, everybody. Welcome to Leadership Lessons from Across the Pond with me, Nancy Halpern, and my colleague and good friend, Julian Roberts. Julian, hello.
Hello, Nancy. Good to see you on this fine Monday afternoon, morning.
Indeed, it's always good to see you. So, Julian, we are addressing a evergreen kind of topic. So, let's start this way, Julian.
Oh no! What's what?
Let's suppose, just imagine that you are one of a great group of colleagues. You all really get along and you go to the pub and you're great friends. And all of a sudden, congratulations, Julian Roberts, you've been promoted. And now, instead of bonding about that old boss and everyone complaining about that guy, you're the guy. You are now the manager of your peers. How would you handle that, Julian? Do you think, is that going to be an easy transition, a difficult transition, maybe a little bit of both?
Do you know what? It's quite difficult. I've experienced it myself a number of times in my sort of career, sort of working in the corporate world. And it's that uncomfortableness from the excitement of being told you've been promoted.
Yes.
and then suddenly, and you're managing these people who have been alongside you and your peers, it can be quite daunting, actually. And I found initially quite a daunting thing to do. And I remember it quite clearly, and I did give some thought about it, because I think you have to really give some thought about it, because you can make a complete hash of it and burn those relationships and hack everybody off and become, because the key thing with it is obviously not becoming the big boss. I'm the boss now and I can tell you what to do. So what I did initially, which I think is really good to do, is to really have one-to-ones with everybody. Is to really get to people, have a one-to-one, understand where they're coming from, understand their objectives. And also, for me, I was understanding more about what they were managing in their business. I knew a little bit about, because obviously I was part of the team, but I needed to know a bit more. And I started to build that relationship in a slightly different manner. And that's the difference. It was a slightly different, because what I also started to share a little bit about my view on the sort of team and the vision I have for the team and how we're going to go forward, to start to sort of share a little difference of relationship.
Did any of them shift their attitude towards you? You mentioned about feeling, can feel very daunting to step into that role of authority and manage it well. Well, what about from your peers or former peers, or at least on the level? Did they treat you differently at first or at all, do you think?
I think initially there was a little bit of observing how I was going to handle it and how our relationship would sort of pan out. So there's perhaps a little bit of what I would call reticence, or sort of just playing it, sort of playing a bit cool, really, and not going into it too much with the relationship, because it changed. And I think as a peer as well, there's a difference as well, and the change, and you've got to handle that as well. And how do you relate to this person who's a peer now is a boss? And I think there's all that was going on. So I think there was certainly a difference initially, but I guess it was the one-to-one which was really good, but also then just setting out that sense of what we're trying to do here. And I wasn't going to come and lord it over them and tell them what to do, and because I am the boss now and you do as that sort of approach. But I also galvanized it in a team as well. So I brought that all together and I listened to how they thought about things. So it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, have you experienced it yourself in terms of being promoted?
No.
I'm sure you've been promoted. I'm sure you've been promoted.
I've never been promoted. I was always hired as the boss, Julian. It was clear to me that I should be in charge. So it was never an issue. But I would like to make a point that's highly political based on what you said, meaning workplace politics. For all of you who have peers, I think Julian has highlighted the importance of having good peer relationships now, because you really want to build those, because what you were talking about is that they trusted you. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make the light, but a light of it. I've actually never been in this situation. I've coached people in this situation.
I was going to say, have you had somebody who you've promoted or coached? That what advice have you given them in terms of helping that transition? Because it is a difficult transition. It can be.
It can. Well, I just had a client on the phone a few days ago, and this is exactly what happened to her. And she had had some, especially one really difficult peer relationship. But their former manager left in perhaps not the most stellar of circumstances. So she had a little bit of cleaning up to do. And she tends to be a very direct person, but not a mean person. So she was very direct. Very
like yourself.
Oh, but much nicer than I am, yes. And a far more skilled negotiator, but thank you, I think. And she was very clear, actually, about what she expected from certain members of her new team and what she would not really tolerate. And so, there is also, I think, an importance to have clarity about your own values and your own priorities. And hopefully those aren't brand new. They know you to be that way. So we get back to the sort of prequel, I think that's the word, prequel to this story, which is that, have you been a good partner for the last year or 2 years? Have you been a good colleague? Are you now exactly the same person, as you said, Julian, right? The same person that you always have been. I think one of the pieces of advice that I've given is to not actually make changes too quickly, because the dust kind of needs to settle. But there is an exception to that. There's a fairly good book, it's just too long, called The First 90 Days. But for those of you savvy treasure hunters out there, there's a 12-page PDF cheat sheet version of it that I recommend. If you are in a turnaround situation, meaning this is a crisis, step in and make change quickly. So it's good to take a little bit of time and figure out exactly what's going on in the greater context.
No, I agree. And I think you make a point about setting those clear boundaries as well, because often you get into a situation where perhaps things have said or your approach has been slightly different, is to, within those one-to-ones, to really set some boundaries. And obviously, because people will start to challenge you as well. People will come to you and perhaps dig up things from previously or previous bosses to try and challenge your leadership. And it's important to take hold of that. Obviously, do it in a one-to-one context as opposed to obviously publicly, because that boundary piece is really important as a leader anyway. But obviously, when you're a new leader with your peers, I think that's really, really vital. And I agree with you. Sort of showing almost reiterating your values and your beliefs and who you are and how you want to manage, how you want to lead the team, and what's your approach to leadership as well. And so people start to understand a bit more about that, because they perhaps wouldn't have had that in the context of as a peer-peer approach.
Someone brought me a different issue on this, or a different wrinkle, as it were, which is that your team may be meeting without you, or there may be pieces of information that as a peer you used to get all the time that you're not getting anymore. I mean, people think the boss knows everything. Well, that's really not exactly. Are you kidding? In fact, there's an argument to be made that if you're in a hierarchical organization, the further up you are, the less information flows up. But that's another topic. But what if you have you been in that situation, Julian? Or what advice would you have if your concern is that you're not hearing as much anymore? People aren't telling you, they're not including you. You're not one of the gang because you're the manager, and you're concerned that there's information, even soft information, that you're not really getting anymore.
Yeah, and I think there's two things on this for me. On this, the first one is the lack of perhaps getting information, which you may feel a bit excluded, but then is that just because you're not part of the banter now? And that's okay, that's fine. There's a difference. I think we've got to be careful we don't make ourselves thinking we're missing out on some communication when actually it's probably not. It's just healthy banter that perhaps you're not part of now because you're not a peer. There may be stuff that you are missing, but I would hope through through the one-to-one process and through trying to gain people back to becoming followers of you in that setting, building the trust, building that relationship, making you gain the respect, because you've got to earn that respect, you've got to earn that influence. It doesn't happen overnight. Just because you've been promoted that, they've not promoted you, somebody else has. So I think there's an element of earning respect, and that comes with time, and that through that you'll start to get what you need to know. There will be still stuff you'll be never aware of,
right?
But hopefully it's not critical. The other thing to think about, and this is, I think people forget, is not that you go completely lonely, but we know as you get higher up in management or leadership, you become more lonely. And one minute you had this peers around you who you're all having the banter, chatting, and it was all good, healthy stuff. Now you're promoted, and that relationship has changed. And I would always encourage anybody who's becoming into leadership to build those relationships with other leaders, whether that's within the organization, if it's possible, or outside the organization, and build a network around you. Because there's moments when you just need to sometimes rant a little bit or go to somebody for a bit of advice, and you can't do that with your peers or your people you're leading. And so I think it's important to build those relationships with other leaders in the organization who are in a similar context to you, and really build your network.
Another great point. You actually have peers. You just have a different peer group.
Yeah.
These are whole new peers. And so you do have to focus some attention on building relationships now with these peers. And that's something you didn't have to do before because they were a step up from you. And so what's your comfort level of the fact that now you've been elevated and you're on a different playing field? And so you do have to look across as well. Two more things I'd like to throw into this mix as sort of tips and ideas. The first is, don't try to create these new bonds by acting like their best friend. Because there will come a time when you may have to deliver bad news, let someone go, give some critical feedback that won't be comfortable. And that switch, if you have to make a turn from being their best buddy to being the boss person, is going to come off as very insincere and very heavy-handed. I'm not saying be cold. I'm saying be cognizant that you won't bond by being their best buddy. The other sort of tip or kind of pitfall to look out for is triangulation, meaning you will have someone on your team who comes to complain to you about Julian or Nancy, and they're going to want you to be on their side. They're going to want you to be their ally against that other person on the team because because you're the boss and they're displaying to you that they have your back. You really don't want to get involved in these things if you can avoid it. You want Nancy and Julian to settle it themselves and to prevent both of them from coming to you as the mommy or the daddy to settle their kind of sibling rivalry.
No, and agree. And I think just to add on to that is, as I said right at the beginning, is be mindful there is a change. I think the mistake a lot of leaders I know think, it's all going to be as it was. No, it's not. It's different. Yeah. Your buddy relationship is different. But you can still have a relationship and still have that sense of have a beer with people and everything else. But it's just being mindful of that relationship change and continue to get alongside with them, continue to build that relationship, but in a different manner. It's just in a different path now. And I'd always encourage any sort of newly promoted in that context is to, if you spot any awkwardness or any thing who's trying to undermine your leadership, is call it out, as in, get alongside that person and just nip it in the bud as soon as you can. Because not only will it will stop it going on, but it also will display how you're going to lead. And once you've done it once, they won't do it again. In a sense of unhealthy ways. Obviously, it's good to be challenged in a sense, but in a sense of unhealthy attitudes that may come about it.
Yeah, and if somebody's trying to butter you up because they think you were their best friend before, try just not to react to that. I'm not sure you can call them out in the same way, but just don't take the bait. Be, as you say, be mindful that people view you differently now, and you can be friendly, but you may not be able to be as casual. Because there is a difference between those two things.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Any last ideas or tips or warning signals, Julian, that you'd like to share from your experience, since you've been through this and I haven't?
I suppose for me, it's just it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think it's a time thing, and encouraging people to keep reflecting and building those relationships, but it will take time to win people over.
Right. And on that note, sadly, we have to say goodbye, but thank you, Julian, and I'll see you next week.
Absolutely, Nancy. Good to talk to you again. Thank you.
As always, take care.